I'm going to say this slowly, because what just happened doesn't make sense. 1 minute ago, Iran made a statement that should have shaken every headline in America. They didn't say they're under pressure. They didn't say they're struggling. They said the war is not going well for the United States or Israel. And when I read that, I didn't just scroll past it. I stopped, because that's not what we've been told. We were told this would be fast. We were told this would be controlled. We were told this would be decisive. So how do you go from everything is under control to hearing something like that? That's when I realized either they're bluffing or we're not seeing the full picture. And what I'm about to show you is where things start to get uncomfortable. Because behind the confident speeches, behind the clean headlines, there's a completely different story unfolding. A story that doesn't look like victory. A story that doesn't look like control. A story that feels unfinished. And the deeper I went, the more one question kept coming back. What if this war isn't going the way we think it is? Now, before you jump to conclusions, let me be clear. This isn't just another overseas conflict you can ignore. This is the United States, directly involved in a rapidly escalating war in one of the most sensitive regions on Earth. And when something like this starts to shift, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It hits oil. It hits global markets. It hits everyday people. And that's exactly why what's happening right now is so important. Because while officials continue to project confidence, the reality on the ground is starting to tell a very different story. Reports confirm that hundreds of American troops have already been wounded. Think about that. That's not a clean operation. That's not a quick mission. That's a real war. And real wars don't follow scripts. They evolve. They get messy. They surprise you. And right now, we're in that phase where things are starting to feel unpredictable. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because despite massive strikes, despite overwhelming force, Iran hasn't collapsed. In fact, it hasn't even slowed down the way many expected. Missiles are still being launched, drones are still being deployed, regional tensions are still rising. So now you have a situation where the US is applying pressure, but Iran is still pushing back. And that changes everything. Because wars are supposed to show momentum, clear momentum. But what we're seeing right now, it doesn't feel clear at all. It feels contested. And when a war becomes contested, that's when timelines start to stretch. That's when expectations start to break. And that's when narratives start to crack. Now here's the part that really made me pause. Because intelligence assessments are starting to suggest something unexpected. Iran's system isn't collapsing, it's stabilizing. Let that sink in. The entire idea behind overwhelming force is simple. You hit hard enough, and things fall apart. But here, they didn't fall apart. They tightened. Power became more concentrated. Leadership became more controlled. And suddenly, this doesn't look like a system on the edge. It looks like a system that's adapting. And that's dangerous, because an adapting opponent is much harder to predict. But it gets even more complicated. Because this war isn't just being fought with weapons, it's being fought with perception. And right now, Iran is playing that game very carefully. They're not trying to win in one moment, they're trying to stretch this out, to create doubt, to create hesitation, to slowly shift how people see the conflict. And that brings us back to that statement. The war is not going well for the US or Israel. At first, it sounds like propaganda. Of course they would say that. Of course, they would try to project confidence. But here's the problem. Statements like that only work if people start to believe them. And right now, people are starting to ask questions. Because when you combine that statement with ongoing troop injuries, with continued retaliation, with no clear timeline, suddenly it doesn't sound as crazy. And that's when perception starts to shift. Now here's where things escalate. Because reports indicate Iran has rejected de-escalation efforts. They're not backing down, they're not rushing to negotiate, they're standing firm, and that tells you something very important. This is not a country that feels like it's about to lose, this is a country that believes it can endure. And in a long conflict, endurance is everything. Because the longer a war lasts, the more pressure builds, not just on the battlefield, but politically, socially, economically. And that pressure, it doesn't stay hidden forever, it starts to show. Now let's talk about the US response. Because when escalation begins, it becomes very hard to slow it down. More strikes, more operations, more messaging that everything is under control. But here's the risk. The more you escalate, the more you raise expectations, and expectations are dangerous. Because if results don't match those expectations, people notice. And right now, we're entering that exact moment, where the war was expected to be short, but it's not ending, where the opponent was expected to weaken, but they're still active, where confidence was expected to rise, but instead, uncertainty is growing. And when uncertainty grows, people start looking for answers. That's when narratives begin to fracture. That's when trust begins to weaken. And that's exactly what we're starting to see. Social media is already reacting. People are debating. People are questioning. People are comparing what they're hearing to what they're seeing. And once that process starts, it's very hard to stop. Because in today's world, information spreads fast, really fast. And all it takes is one idea, which brings us back to that statement. Because it didn't just stay in one place. It spread across platforms, across conversations, across audiences, and suddenly, millions of people are hearing the same message. This war isn't going well. Now, whether that's fully true or not, almost doesn't matter, because perception shapes reality. And if enough people start to believe something, it changes the conversation. It changes expectations. It changes pressure. And pressure changes decisions. Now, here's the question nobody is asking directly. What if this was never going to be a quick war? What if the expectations were wrong from the start? Because history has shown us something very clear. The conflicts that are expected to end quickly are often the ones that last the longest, and when they last, they become something else. They become complicated. They become unpredictable. They become difficult to control, and right now we are dangerously close to that scenario. Because nothing about this feels simple anymore. Nothing about this feels predictable, and nothing about this feels close to finished. And that's the part that should really make you think. Because if this is just the beginning, then everything we're seeing right now is only the surface, which means the real story hasn't even unfolded yet. And that's why this moment matters, because moments like this are turning points. They're the moments where narratives shift, where expectations change, where history quietly starts moving in a different direction. So when Iran says the war is not going well, don't just dismiss it. Don't just accept it either. Question it. Look deeper. Because somewhere between what's being said and what's actually happening is the truth. And that truth, it's still developing, right now, in real time, and we are watching it unfold. But here's the reality nobody wants to say out loud. This war is not over. It's not close to over. And it may be far more complicated than anyone expected. So the real question isn't just who's winning. The real question is, what are we not seeing yet? What's still building beneath the surface? What's coming next? Because whatever happens next won't just stay there. It will ripple outward, economically, politically, globally. And when it does, everything could change. So stay aware, stay informed, because this story, it's far from finished. And what happens next might be the part nobody is ready for. Health,